Hey there, welcome into this edition of Bills Take Two. I'm Jonathan Acosta, joined by our WGRZ Bills insider, Vic Carucci. Vic, before we dive into any football discussion, I want to wish you a happy belated Merry Christmas and an early Happy New Year. Before we talk about football, I got to ask you, what was the best thing that Santa brought you this year?
Yeah, well, I'm going to give the same answer usually every year. Just the chance for the whole family to be together and enjoying. At this stage of my life, of course, I used to be watching my daughters open their gifts. Now it's watching the grandchildren do that and really get all caught up in the excitement and fun of the day. So that was the best. And the rest of it was, again, just chilling. And, oh, by the way, I watch football on Christmas Day, a beautiful thing.
The two F's, football and family, two of the best things about the holiday season. Let's dive into the actual football for right now. The Bills taking on the Jets this Sunday in Orchard Park, a chance to wrap up the 2 seed. And something that's interesting is when the Bills wrapped up the division against the 49ers on Sunday Night Football, right after that, they made it known that they were looking to chase down the Chiefs for the #1 seed in the AFC. Well, that specific goal is out of reach now with Kansas City clinching the #1 seed and home field advantage. So I asked Josh Allen this week in practice how that sort of recalibrates the team is approaching these final 2 weeks. And he said, look, locking up the #2 seed now is a priority for this team. Vic, what does that say maybe about the way the team is looking at these final 2 weeks, knowing that if they can clinch that 2 seed, it would mean they would get to play their first 2 playoff games here in Orchard Park?
I think it's tough to define the 2nd seed as a real special prize, even though it is an advantage, you would think, to be able to play at least 2 home playoff games, knowing what home has meant to the Bills, a place where they've had a perfect record. So from that standpoint, I can see some incentive. But I think that incentive has a lower ceiling than the incentive to go for the 1 seed in terms of just all-out effort, not only physically by the players themselves, but by Sean McDermott and his usage of personnel, just from the standpoint of, okay, do you unload, so to speak, all of your arsenal on an opponent to get that #2? Is it really that important? And especially when you're facing a team that you go in as an understandable favorite, one that you should beat, perhaps even when you're not with your best players on the field.
If the Bills are able to wrap up the #2 seed, I think we would imagine that the Bills would look to rest their starters, Josh Allen included, in that Week 18 game against New England because no seeding on the line in that game. That therefore would then make this game against the Jets possibly Allen's last chance to make a final impression upon the MVP voters in what's become a very heated MVP race between Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Vic, how much of an opportunity do you think this is for Allen to make that last impression on voters? And how important do you think it is for him to have a big game against the Jets if he wants that award, considering the way we've seen Lamar Jackson play these last few weeks and the way maybe some of the narratives are starting to change in this discussion?
Well, speaking from the perspective as a voter, on this panel that selects these individual honors, including MVP, I can tell you that the narrative stuff doesn't matter. The narrative stuff is fun, fodder, if you want to call it that, filler for the talk shows on television and on radio. It just provides a debatable topic and content along those lines. I don't care about that. I care about the body of work and the body of work as it applies to the regular season, because the rules as we are given, the guidelines we are given by the Associated Press to vote on these particular awards, especially this one, it's based on what happens in the regular season. Now, we're all, I think, knowledgeable enough on the voting panel, logical enough to know that the regular season kind of ends quicker for some teams than others. And in the specific case of the Bills, it could be coming to an end even during the course of the game they're playing against the Jets. And by that, I mean, if it turns into a competitive game in the latter stages, are they really, again, throttling down? Does Josh Allen need to be out there? Or if in any way we saw that elbow issue that he had in the New England game and the numbness he felt in his throwing hand, if that somehow arises or some other physical ailment, to take him out for precaution. I'm saying not a clear-cut injury where he's off the field, but I'm saying just to err on the side of caution, then you take that into account, and the body of work is obviously falling short of a full 17 games. And that would also apply to Lamar Jackson and Saquon Barkley, the presumptive other two in this discussion. So from my standpoint, there are, three legitimate candidates, but especially two in Allen and Jackson, whose games, whose performances, have been, even though they're not statistically identical, and Lamar Jackson's numbers are better overall, it isn't something that you're feeding into a computer. I'm not going by just a numbers test. I'm going by what my eyes tell me. And believe me, besides watching Allen on a regular, full-time basis as part of what I do here for Channel 2, I certainly watch the entire league, and I especially take the time to rewatch, when I haven't been able to see him live, the games that Lamar Jackson has played beyond the one where he faced the Bills, and take in what his impact has been from MVP worthiness, and it's all there. He's a previous two-time winner. The discussion of, well, he's won it twice before, give somebody else a turn, or voters will be bored with him. Maybe that's true as a human condition. I heard something hilarious on ESPN, an odds maker for them, a guy who talks about all the betting, the gaming, said that trying to handicap the MVP vote is a bit challenging because you're dealing with human voters. They're humans. You're trying to gauge and predict what humans will do. Last I checked, football players are human, coaches are human, all the variables that humans provide for games. Why is that any different from the vote? But I know what's different. This is something that's bet upon heavily now than it was before. It's risen, and again, I think it takes us back to this narrative conversation because so many people want to talk about something in which they have a financial stake. Again, I don't care about that, and I do none of that, have no interest in that, but I will tell you that my mind is wide open to see how these two, especially all three, I'm not going to eliminate Saquon Barkley, but I can in my mind tell you that I have the two quarterbacks as elevated as likely they are with others. And we're not talking to each other as voters like, who you voting for? No, who you vote for? I have not been part of any of those conversations, nor do I have any desire to be. Just do it the way I've done it every year. Just see where it brings us at the end of the year with viable candidates.
Vic, I think the conversation around this award is fascinating this year because I think reasonable minds can come to the conclusion that Allen and Jackson would both be deserving of the award this year. You see so much of the conversation trying to elevate one while downplaying the other. You brought up ESPN and saw something today. I think it was Ryan Clark saying that if Josh Allen won the MVP, it'd the equivalent of Charles Barkley winning the MVP during the Jordan years. That's just some of the stuff that this discussion has been relegated to this year. And you look at last year, and Jackson won the award over Allen. You could say that Allen had the better numbers over Jackson, but Jackson and the Ravens were the #1 seed. This year, it's Jackson with the numbers. He leads the league in passing yards, in total touchdowns, and QBR. Yet Josh Allen has seemingly had what has been maybe the most valuable season to his team because Jackson is playing next to Derrick Henry, while Josh Allen only a couple of weeks ago put up 48 points on the Detroit Lions, had that MVP moment against the 49ers. He's seemingly had those moments where he has elevated his team. So I guess my question to you is, you don't have to tell us exactly how you're voting, but how do you weigh the statistical output maybe from Jackson or in any other season just in a vacuum, stats versus the name of the award of the most valuable player?
It's really both. I mean, you definitely have to pay attention to the numbers. You don't ignore them. But they can't, in my view, be your only guide. Because again, if that were the case, then punch him in and say whoever had the best numbers at the end of the year, he's your MVP. It's not that simple. What do those numbers mean in the context of the team's performance? And when has each player, or how has each player done his part to make his team a viable Super Bowl contender? Because those two should come into play. The silliest arguments I've heard so far, among many, are one, Lamar Jackson has Derrick Henry, therefore that makes him a lesser candidate than Josh Allen, who doesn't have a guy of Derrick Henry's stature running the football. But to say Josh Allen doesn't have the help of a running game, of a back and running backs who can help move the ball on the ground, I think is foolish. I think James Cook has been a huge factor in the Bills being where they are, in winning the number of games that they have, to be in the position they are to not only have clinched a division title, but perhaps the number 2 seed, at least the 3 seed. James Cook, again, so big a part of that. The offensive line and their run blocking ability, so big a part of that. From that standpoint, I think it does cancel each other out. Hearing this notion that, well, it's Derrick Henry, and without him, Lamar Jackson is nothing. You take James Cook in that running game away from Josh Allen, give them no effectiveness on the ground, no ability of Joe Brady to call those plays, in addition to what Allen's done in the passing game with a core of non-number 1 receivers. I would say, there is a canceling out effect. They both. It's foolish to just assume the Henry Ravens are it's a lesser award or a lesser production for Lamar Jackson than it is for Allen. The other foolish thing, and this applies to Jackson too, is the failures in the postseason. Again, why does that matter now? I hear others say, well, he's only good in the regular season, and look what he does in the postseason. I agree, that is true. But it's also true that Josh Allen has gone only as far once as the championship game of the conference, and it's only and you can argue that he's only been as good as the team around him. You could say other factors have helped short circuit the Bills in the postseason. There have been other factors that have helped short circuit Lamar Jackson. It isn't only the one guy's shortcomings at the quarterback position to do that. And for the record, Josh has, if you go through the quarterbacks from the head-to-head that he has conquered or has found success against, that list isn't very impressive. And the name on the list that he is 0 for 3 against in the postseason is Patrick Mahomes. Really, as good as it gets at the position. That doesn't mean Josh doesn't belong in the hierarchy of quarterbacks by any means. But it does mean keep an open mind, see a big picture, understand these silly arguments are just that, silly, and focus on what makes the player the most valuable for the league. And by the way, when the voting is done, and I would think it doesn't take a genius to assume that there's going to be some split voting here. Both guys, I would assume, get a decent number of votes. One, I hope, likely gets more. I don't want to see any kind of a tie here, and that's happened before. There have been co-MVPs. I think that's just weak and waters it down. But when that happens, does it mean that the guy who finishes second is less of a player? No, no. It's just one vote for one award, and if you ask either one of those guys, there's only one award they want. You know what that is. It's holding up the Lombardi Trophy in February.
This MVP discussion can go on for hours and hours, and like you said, both teams are really just fighting for that Super Bowl trophy in February in New Orleans. For the Bills, their best path to get there right now is getting that 2 seed, something they can do with the win against the Jets. And this is the second time this season that these two teams are playing each other. The Bills won a close matchup on Monday Night Football back in October at the Meadowlands. Now the Jets are coming to town. They've lost 5 of their past 6 games. Their season is essentially over. They're a banged-up team. Devontae Adams, for one, has missed the last 2 days of practice. How do you assess this matchup, with this being the second time around that these divisional opponents are facing off, maybe even considering the way the Bills-Patriots game went last week, where we see how tight sometimes these December games can be between division opponents?
Yeah, I think this game could fall under the heading of a typically tight divisional game, even with the Jets having 0 at stake here and really just playing out the string. It feels like they would come into this with some sense of making it competitive, because on a matchup basis, they're capable of that. Defensively, they're capable of that. Jeff Ulbrich, their interim head coach and former defensive coordinator, knows how to scheme the Bills pretty well. And I would think he'll have something cooked up that will be challenging. Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback for the Jets, is this his last hurrah in the NFL, period? These final couple of games for him. How does he want to go out? You would think, being not only the Hall of Fame bound player that he is, and the guy who, at his very best of his career, I don't think he's at that point physically anymore, can do some things, can get red hot or have moments where he can. And there's still some of that, I think, in his aging tank. So I think it could be close and competitive, and that's what's going to make this thing interesting to me, the most interesting element. If the Jets are there to give the Bills a game, and the Bills we can all sense that. Now we're getting into the second half, and the game is still not decided. And now you begin to wonder, to what extent is that second seeding prize so valuable that the Bills are going to keep pressing on the accelerator, Sean McDermott, with who he has out there, to what extent strategically things are utilized, both offensively and defensively. In other words, and knowing that in the game against Patriots, Josh Allen said they were holding some things back for the sake of the playoffs. Strategy. So there's that conversation. And then the health conversation. You know, you've got a bunch of guys that are questionable. Who are they likely not to be active? Yes, Matt Milano, Rasul Douglas expected to be good to go and play, but how will there be a pitch count? How limited will they be? Again, knowing that the most important games they're going to play are not these next 2 games. And the last point I'd make about the second seed, while some would argue, yeah, but they've got to play that divisional game at home if it's likely to be, say, the Ravens rather than go to Baltimore in the second round. My counter to that is, if you're good enough to be a Super Bowl champion, if you really are that good, you should be able to win anywhere. There's no magic with Highmark Stadium or Highmark Stadium in the snow or Highmark Stadium in the rain, just because it's the home crowd. Yeah, they give you support, and maybe their noise can affect things, but I'm sorry, if you're really that good, you win wherever you play.
One counter I will make to that, not to create a whole discussion here, but the Bills, we've seen how important home field is to them this year. 7-0 at home this year, 5-3 on the road. So they have been able to maybe be a little bit more consistent at home this year. You did touch on the injuries real quick, and I want to end on that note with Matt Milano, Rasul Douglas. Both of them are good to go. Rasul Douglas specifically has missed the last 2 games. They have 4 players that were limited, with Taylor Rapp, Cam Lewis, 3 players in the secondary that are limited, along with Curtis Samuel on offense. Just what do you think are the impacts specifically on defense of the 3 players in the secondary, with Hamlin, Rapp, and Lewis all questionable, and the impacts of getting Douglas and Milano back for this game?
Yeah, that could be interesting to see how that might compromise some things, and does that give Aaron Rodgers more opportunity to take advantage of who's not back there. And we'll see. I think the latest I had seen on Devontae Adams was that he would be good to go. If I'm not mistaken, they've been kind of doing the preservation routine with him during the course of practice, or so it seems. We'll see on game day. But yeah, and again, I'm back to priority of why you should hold back if you have the chance. You could perhaps win the game without them, rely on your depth, but that could be asking a lot of your depth to do so. But when all is said and done, if this team, and remember, of course, they'd have another opportunity to get that second seed in their final game if they lose against the Jets. But now we're one game closer. You're a week away from starting the playoffs. Is getting anyone hurt or making them less physically able to play worth it? Is the whole season riding on the ability to play a playoff game at all or you can't play them all at home, but at least the first two. If you play in the AFC Championship game and the Chiefs are the host team, go beat the Chiefs. Go there and beat the Chiefs. Beat Baltimore at Baltimore if you have to. The 5-3 road record thing with the Bills in the regular season, I'm unfazed by that. If that is the answer as to what this team really is, that really they can only play at home, they failed to get the number one seed, then they should pack it in. But they're not, and I'm saying that very sarcastically because that shouldn't matter. If you're good enough, you're good enough. Well, there was a run that these teams had where they went to 4 Super Bowls in a row, 4 in a row. Okay, they won a lot of games at home, but they also won games on the road, critical road games to get to the Super Bowl. And the path that they followed, those weren't always the easiest path. Last point, players love, I think, money. I think we all appreciate it to some extent. Throw in that extra wild card game, which they have now, plus the other 2, wherever they're played, plus the Super Bowl. The path that the Bills are going to be taking to get to the Super Bowl and play 4, which means, of course, they would have to possibly win out in the remaining 2 games, depending on what happens with the Ravens, and then get to the Super Bowl and win that. That's a lot of extra money in those 4 postseason games.
Vic, I think everyone would agree with you that everyone likes a little bit of extra money. Incredible that we're saying this Sunday, the final home game of the regular season, at least, when the Bills host the Jets. It's a 1 o'clock kickoff at Highmark Stadium. For Vic Carucci, I'm Jonathan Acosta. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.